on today's episode of the Cryptoverse livestream. Here I have Mr. Bartek Ringwelski. Is that the way to pronounce it?
Yes, perfect.
From this Chief Operating Officer of bitFlyer. Is that right?
That's right. bitFlyer USA.
bitFlyer USA. So first question, how are you doing today, mate?
I'm doing great. It's 12:30 p.m. in California and 65 degrees outside Fahrenheit.
Well, you see, you say Fahrenheit and then I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, yeah, America.
Sure. So we've got this sort of interview together. So because you just mentioned something very, very specific there, which is bitFlyer USA, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people who are familiar with the crypto space would normally associate bitFlyer with Japan, right? So are you now branching out into the US market? Is that?
Yeah, that's right. So background on bitFlyer is that bitFlyer was based started in Tokyo in 2014 by two co-founders from Goldman Sachs. They grew that into what's become one of the largest virtual currency exchanges in the world. And in late last year, the US office launched. And then actually in January, the European office launched. So we have a bit of a global strategy for expansion. Okay. But bitFlyer in Japan is quite large. We're just getting started in the US and as well as in Europe.
So, it actually says it on your website, I think. The world's largest Bitcoin exchange has landed in the USA. How do you measure largest?
Yeah, the measure that we have there is through volume. And that's obviously, vast majority of that is the Japanese volume. But the reason why that's relevant is because one of the advantages of being able to be a global exchange is that you can link your order books together. So if you were just starting out as a new company in the US or anywhere, you sort of start off with an order book that's just sort of siloed. But the advantage of being a global company is that we can pretty soon in the future start linking our order books together. So people in the US could be trading with people in Japan. And all of a sudden you've got the depth of sort of a global market.
How is that going to work though? Because if you've got, because every market is a pair, right? Like I was looking on CoinMarketCap and looking at like the overall volume for bitFlyer, and at the minute it only lists like 4 markets, like Bitcoin against the yen, Ethereum against Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash against Bitcoin, and Bitcoin against the US dollar, right? So let's take the hypothetical situation where you're operating in Japan, America, and Europe, which would be the yen, the dollar, and the euro, right?
Right.
So you're obviously going to have a dollar, euro, and yen Bitcoin pair, right? And
that's right.
Somehow you can combine that volume somehow?
Well, what you can do is you can actually trade that pair that's not with your local currency. So for example, someone in Japan could trade on our Bitcoin USD board.
I see what you mean. Okay, I see what you mean. So
like a really simple example would be you transfer Bitcoin into our board, the USD board, as a Japanese resident, and then you sell some, and now you have US dollars, and now you can trade with both Bitcoin and or Bitcoin on the USD board.
I see, because you're using your US dollar balance at bitFlyer, and then you can just trade in and out of the dollar into Bitcoin, back to Japanese yen, from Bitcoin to the euro, and so on. Interesting. Is that a nuanced thing for bitFlyer, or do other exchanges do that? Is that something you guys came up with, or are you just saying that's the benefit of being global?
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know if we're exclusively the only company that's figured that out, but that's the benefit of being associated with a really large company in Japan. Because if we were just doing it on our own, we'd have to build the order books. But once we link those order books together, all of a sudden Japanese residents can start trading Bitcoin with US residents. In the US, we could expose BTC JPY to US residents and then have them trade on, what's a very, very sort of active market in Japan. And then eventually Europe and the US can trade together. So that's what makes it interesting.
That is very interesting, because the prices wouldn't get that far out of whack, would they, before someone closes the gap, right?
Yeah, it's actually interesting because, as you know, there's local price discrepancies, right, between the different global virtual currency markets. And a lot of that has to do with movement of money and cash, how locked in certain markets are. So I think I've seen that like Venezuela trades really high, but that's because they're relatively difficult for outside capital to sort of get into those markets. So when we start connecting the order books between Europe, US, Japan, local price differences, I expect, I guess, would probably start going down as there's sort of like free capital moving between those different entities.
You say the price would go down?
Sorry, not down. The relative price difference between markets would go down.
The price difference, yeah, that spread between one and another. I see. Interesting. Now, I suppose you could. That's like an arbitrage trade, which you could do right now, like between exchanges and do it manually. But you're saying just, this will be all within one ecosystem, which will be bitFlyer. And if you have a bitFlyer account, I could have my Euro account and then trade it against the dollar and the Japanese yen.
Yeah,
that's cool. Yeah, absolutely. And liquidity is like the liquidity is an important thing for the volatility. That's two illities in one go. But that's why crypto is so volatile, as far as I understand it right now, is just the lack of liquidity means that some relatively small amount of capital makes the waves pretty serious, right?
So I mean, Bitcoin is volatile as an asset class, sort of regardless of the exchange you're on, because it's so sensitive to people's perceptions of its value. But what makes a currency within a specific board very volatile is the depth of the order book. So if you have a very shallow order book and someone places a large trade, all of a sudden that can move the market within your particular board. And sort of nobody wins in that scenario, right? Because if you're the person who's making that large trade, you're hoping to sort of get the price that you sort of see on the screen. And then you make a large trade, all of a sudden you're paying sort of like different prices at the end of your order than when you started out.
Averages out.
And so the nice thing about having a deep order book is that you can make a particularly large trade without really impacting the market. And that's what, maybe people who are smaller traders don't really care too much. But if you're a larger trader or institution, we found that that's something that they actually care quite a lot about.
Sure. It's funny, I had this discussion today, actually. At what point does a trader go from an exchange to, say, like an over-the-counter thing? Because someone was asking me, like, so there's essentially two markets. There's like an underground market, and then there's the mainstream exchange market. So why do people use... And my answer to them was, why do people use over-the-counter markets, was similar to what you've just said. You can't guarantee if you wanted to sell or buy $100 million worth of Bitcoin, you wouldn't get it at the market rate. You'd have to find a counterparty willing to buy $100 million worth of Bitcoin. You agree a price via a broker, and then the deal is done, right? And it just trades peer-to-peer, right? So I suppose there is a threshold when you would just destroy the order book on a public exchange,
No, exactly. Yeah.
But,
so I think when you... So I think you're exactly right. When you have a particularly large order and you want to have certainty, then you go through an OTC desk and you find a private buyer or seller and you make the transaction.
Right. I know this is kind of off topic, but you've got expertise in this area, so I'll ask you. Those over-the-counter trades, how does that end up affecting the main exchange market? Because as long as there's trading behind the scenes, that's ultimately has to affect the main market, but only if they took some of that Bitcoin and started trading on the open market. I can't quite create the link there between the over-the-counter volume and then how that would impact the price positive or negative on the open market that we regular users use.
Yeah, so I think that the interesting thing about the OTC trading is that it's actively trying to not move the market, right? It's basically two people finding and sort of agreeing on a certain price, and then that price, that transfer happens. Now, you could argue that because it's part of the Bitcoin blockchain, that you'd be able to see the transaction on the blockchain, and from that you could see that someone purchased Bitcoin at a certain price at a high volume, and then that might drive the perception of where the market's moving, but it wouldn't necessarily be facilitated on a exchange, right? Where that information is immediately visible, right? Like if we were on the bitFlyer exchange and someone placed a 100 BTC order, everyone would know that something just a lot of volume just happened. Depending on how that OTC trade happens, if it happens on exchange, it'll be visible. If it doesn't happen on an exchange, then it won't be visible. But it will potentially still impact the price in some way as people like realize that 100 BTC had transferred from one wallet to another, and they could speculate that that was a result of like an OTC trade. But it's a lot less immediate in that sense.
But you just made the point perfectly there, which is the whole point of an OTC market is not to move the price with a big buy or a sell. So thank you for that. That's filled in a knowledge gap for me there, right?
Yeah.
So you're the COO of bitFlyer, which is Chief Operating Officer, and I assume that means you don't do surgery. Sounds like it. Chief Operating Officer. So
yeah.
What's actually your role? What do you do day to day like?
Yeah, so my job is to basically grow the U.S. operations and the U.S. division of bitFlyer. So we're a wholly owned subsidiary of bitFlyer Japan. And bitFlyer Japan is like well established, has been there for now. We just celebrated our 4th year anniversary. bitFlyer in the U.S. is a relatively newcomer to the space. And my role is to make it a dominant player in the exchange and sort of overall Bitcoin and virtual currency space in the United States.
Okay, was that a long and difficult process to go from being a Japanese-based exchange to setting up a US arm?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that we had going for us is that we had a very successful product in Japan. Right, and so you get a lot of value from having done a lot of the legwork on the engineering side, but every market's very different, right? And so the first thing that we had to do was to actually get the licensures in the U.S. to be able to operate. So unlike Japan, where they have one regulator, it's called the FSA, the U.S. actually has a myriad of regulators. So we have state by state regulators. We also have sort of like general government bodies that are, that regulate us depending on the type of coins that we have. So it's a lot more complicated in the US. And to operate here, you really need to invest a lot of legwork into your legal and compliance infrastructure early on. So we started operating in November 2018, but we actually started working on it back in 2016. We launched in November 2017. But for a year and a half to 2 years before that, we were working and getting licenses, figuring out the structure, et cetera.
Right, gotcha. And you say here, so I assume you're in the US right now. So
I am, yeah.
You're not operating out of Japan. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, so we're headquartered in San Francisco, California.
Okay, sweet. Is that where you are now then? Yeah.
That's right.
Excellent, excellent. So did you come on into the company with that role, or do you work at the Japan office and then come over, or what's your background before bitFlyer like?
Yeah, so I came into to it with this role, although I joined when we were really, really small. I had previously worked at a couple of fintech companies, one in the peer-to-peer lending space, and then had been involved in financial technology for quite a while. And one of the fascinating things about bitFlyer is that it is a very sort of new industry relative to most things in financial technology. So finance actually is relatively slow moving. And to innovate within finance is actually usually kind of difficult. So what I had worked in was a company that did online lending in a peer-to-peer marketplace. And that was very innovative for financial technology, but it was still lending at the end of the day. And lending's been around for 3,000 years. And there's only so much you can do to sort of differentiate yourself from sort of the next lender. And the fascinating thing about the virtual currency space is that it's the exact opposite, right? The entire industry has only existed for 8 years. We're on our 8th year after the white paper, and it's still being formed. Like everything's changing in front of our eyes. Even the last few months in the U.S. has, things are changing. Like price is changing. Like regulators are changing, and interest in different coins is changing. So I found it to be a really exciting place to switch from lending into.
Sure. So once you'd established the US company, was it like a startup, or was you able to somehow leverage the existing growth of bitFlyer? What I'm getting at is, was it like starting a brand new exchange from the ground up, or was you able to use the momentum of bitFlyer to, bring some customers over? I don't know. That's what I'm asking. Was it like a standing start with 0 customers and had to bootstrap it that way?
It's kind of both. I mean, on one hand, it's a brand new company in the US. bitFlyer is well known in Asia, and in like circles where of traders, but the average person in the US has not heard of bitFlyer. So in that sense, we're starting at a very sort of seedling perspective.
Right.
On the flip side, it's not like a startup because we have our products have already been tested and used by millions of people in Japan. The key sort of thing is to like localize those products and to sort of make them feel and like interact with users here in the way that they expect. But more or less, the DNA is already created. So in that sense, it's quite an advantage because we're not having to build a lot of things from scratch.
Sure.
But we do have to acquire market share sort of from scratch in the same way that any other startup would.
Mm-hmm. And what about like the technology infrastructure? Are people literally logging into the same website coming from the same servers, or are you having to expand it like the US hosting and stuff like that?
Yeah, so there is a separate site for Japan, a separate site for Europe, and a separate site for the US.
Okay, gotcha.
It's all part of the bitFlyer domain. It's sort of like if you went to, I'm going to make this up, but like Sony.com.
Right.
In the US, you'd get the US version of Sony. If you went to Sony.com in Japan, you'd get the Japanese version. Right,
but I suppose that's just an aesthetic difference, right? You're still, to do that thing we mentioned earlier on about combining all the liquidity, the core, the back end bit is powered by the same engine or something, right? So you can link all the order books together and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's right. So we share common sort of like technology infrastructure.
Okay, cool. So how do you, this has always fascinated me, how do you market a cryptocurrency exchange? Like, how do you get people to use it, right? Because there's, to my mind, and I don't know enough about the industry, but there's only so many ways I could think of to differentiate my exchange from the next one. So, and because it's kind of the network effect, it's that network externalities thing. Like everyone uses eBay because that's where all the buyers are, because that's where all the sellers are, because that's where all the buyers are, sort of thing. And with any marketplace model, you have that, you need the buyers and the sellers to make the platform work, right? So that was sort of harping back to my question about going from a standing start. Well, it fascinated me how like Copenhagen started up, because they literally started with nothing, right? No customers. And I'm like, how on earth did you go from nothing with no customers? Why would anyone start using it in the first place? Because no one's there, right? So can you give me some insight onto that? How do you like expand a cryptocurrency exchange and get people to use it?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. There's one, who your target audience is, right? And in this case, our Lightning platform is targeting more sort of professional users. So targeting communities that these professional traders frequent. So we're doing like campaigns with some of the sites that provide tools for traders. We're advertising through sort of channels that people when people search for cryptocurrency exchanges. So there's an entire sort of advertising component to it. But frankly, like what makes this space interesting relative to other places like an eBay is that generally people are pretty satisfied with eBay. So if you were to try to start an eBay competitor, it's like, well, I already have eBay. But if you look at the cryptocurrency exchange space of 2018, there's still a lot of dissatisfaction among users, and that a lot of it came from growth that was really exponential in 2017. So people are a lot less loyal, frankly, I think, to an exchange than they are to something like an eBay. So that's one. The second piece is that people are looking for diversification when it comes to their trading activities and frankly, like where they have any amount of cryptocurrency. So people are looking for diversification just for safety reasons. And frankly, like people in this space tend to want to try the new thing that's different and see how it compares. So I think that's quite an advantage. And then, particularly in our case, once we open up cross-border trading between the different regions, that's going to attract a very specific type of person who's looking to make very sort of large trades on, a BTC JPY board that doesn't exist in the US. Or if they want to trade with Europe, that they could do that through us. So there's the market is actually pretty rife for new entrants, but then there's also some specific competitive advantages that we have that I don't think other people will have.
Okay.
So that's one piece, and then the other thing that I think we've learned and we kind of expected is that the market of people who are professional traders is still small. They do a lot of volume, but like the average person who knows how to place limit orders, how to place special sort of change orders that our platform allows you to do, is still sort of a small percentage of people in the U.S. But what a lot of people are looking for is, how do I buy Bitcoin easily? How do I buy something like Ethereum easily? And what we had publicly stated is that we're going to launch this professional platform, but we're going to move more into consumer this year. And so we're really excited about bringing a much easier interface for buying and selling cryptocurrencies that doesn't have a huge learning curve.
Which isn't exchange in the traditional sense of trading, a trading platform, but more a gateway from the fiat currency world, into the crypto world. So more like a split between Coinbase and GDAX type of thing. GDAX being a trading platform and Coinbase being more of an on-ramp, as I would call it, which I think we need more of, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's a simple way to get into cryptocurrencies that doesn't require a ton of education prior. And frankly, like, the competition, I think, in this space is healthy for consumers in the community.
Absolutely. We definitely need more of that. Absolutely. So I'm just looking at the chat here. Someone says, what is bitFlyer? So do you want to give us a quick 1 minute basic of what on earth is it?
bitFlyer is one of the world's largest virtual currency exchanges and a blockchain research development company based out of Tokyo. The company was started in 2014, and we launched the US at the end of 2017. And then we launched Europe in 2018.
Sweet. And what coins do you currently support? I listed a couple earlier on, but is it mainly a Bitcoin exchange type thing?
Yeah, so we launched our Lightning product with just Bitcoin as a starting point, and we're in the process of adding new currency pairs on the professional side. And sort of the next big thing is going to be linking the order books together between us and Japan and other markets. And then, as I just alluded to, there's some stuff on the horizon related to consumer products that will make it a lot more accessible for the average person to buy Bitcoin as well as other currencies that we're going to be listing.
So that's a big growth area for you, not just attracting more traders, like you say, but getting that, I don't know what you call it. I call it gateway, the regular consumer piece, where if you just want to buy some Bitcoin, right, and hold it, right, a way to do that. So that's something you're going to focus on developing more.
Yeah, and it's most people we sort of realize that start that way, right? Like, you don't start in the Bitcoin or like a virtual currency space by going on to a professional trading platform and starting to place limit orders, right? You first sort of buy a Bitcoin, and then you start tracking the market. You sell it, or you buy some more, and then you realize that there's actually tools that let you do this in a lot more sophisticated way, and that's when you eventually start transitioning to these more professional exchanges. But you need to make it really easy in the beginning, and then a certain percentage of people will self-select into being very, very passionate, like, active users.
Right, they may become traders after the fact, like, yeah. So I'm gonna pick out one of these questions here, like, how do you as bitFlyer decide what coins to support? Because I just listed a few earlier on. Is this accurate? When CoinMarketCap says you support Bitcoin, Ethereum, Bitcoin Cash at the moment, those three.
In Japan, we do, as well as Lisk, Mona, and I don't remember all the ones you just said, but in total, there's 7 in Japan. So the interesting thing about, here are the factors that come into play. We think, one of the most regulated exchanges in the world, because we have regulation from Japan, regulation from Europe, and then regulation in the US. So for us to list coins is a process that kind of bifurcates into one question, which is simple, which is like, do we think that this coin has longevity? Do we think that users will be interested in it? Do we think that our consumers who buy it will be that'll stick around? That's generally easier. The harder part is making sure that it's compliant with all of our different regulatory bodies, and that is a much longer process. So, for example, in the U.S., we are licensed in 43 states, And some states have their own approval processes for certain coins. There's certain coins that are, frankly, easier, and there's certain coins that are harder. So there's a state-by-state component. There's also like the government body. So the SEC has recently come in and had some viewpoints on what they think are securities versus not securities. So, we have to basically go through a process to make sure that all of those boxes are checked before we feel comfortable listing new coins on the platform.
It sounds like the US is a bit of a nightmare, though. So why didn't bitFlyer decide to expand from Japan, like in Asia? Why come all the way over to the US, which sounds like a royal nightmare to me from a regulatory standpoint?
Well, it's a big market, right? Yeah. There's a lot of people here. There's relatively little competition, much like this industry is quite new, and the vision has always been to be a global company. And so to be a global company but not operate in the US, quite difficult to sort of execute on that vision.
Sure.
And the biggest problem is right now the US market can't access the Japanese market, which is the largest Bitcoin market in the world. Something like 50% of all Bitcoin trading exists in Japan.
It reminds me of that thing when there was all that volume from Korea, and then when the Korean regulators cracked down on the virtual bank accounts, where a foreigner could create a virtual bank account and then use that to deposit funds into the Korean cryptocurrency exchanges and so on. And that's where it wasn't Korean volume though, it was sort of international money that was going through these virtual bank accounts and then get into the exchanges that way. And when they cut that off, that caused a bit of a dip in the old Bitcoin prices. The model you're talking about though, where you're linking together the three fiat currency pairs that trade against Bitcoin, is almost an evolved way of doing that, right? So that's a good thing, I think, for the space as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, you're still following all of the local rules for the compliance rules of trading, sort of like bank into Bitcoin, sure. And then the actual exchange happens within a board that you can get into by transferring Bitcoin in. So our goal has always been to allow everyone to have access to Bitcoin and trade amongst each other.
Sure. So let's go to that question. The one I said that it was asked like, I don't know, 50 people have asked the same question. I'm not sure if this is a conspiracy, but the question is, are you going to add DigiByte to the platform? Right, seriously, there was about 50 or 60 people, all with different email addresses and different names, that basically asked the same question. Will you list DigiByte on the exchange? I have no idea why that coin has come up specifically to do with the bitFlyer interview, and I wondered if you had any clue as to why somehow, as soon as someone from bitFlyer came on the show, that suddenly DigiByte came up. I have no idea.
Yeah, not sure, but our company policy is we can't comment publicly about coins that we may or may not list.
That's fair enough. That's fair enough. I mean, there's so many questions about that. Someone asks, like, does it make a difference how centralized or decentralized a coin is? Like Ripple, for example, would Ripple put you off because it's more centralized? Is that one of the criteria that you happen to use when looking at to support a particular crypto?
So what I'll kind of go back to what I shared earlier is a lot of it comes down to what's the regulatory sort of viewpoint of something like that. And so that's the lens that we would take, as well as the consumer benefit we think the customer has.
Sure. And you mentioned earlier on, you said like, you used the phrase bitFlyer's competitive advantages. So can you, I know we probably covered these, but in its own segment, if I asked you what are bitFlyer's sort of competitive advantages, what would you say? Yeah.
So we're a global marketplace for buying and selling virtual currencies. And that allows us to cater to professional traders in a way that no other market can. We're the largest in the world. Something like 30% of all Bitcoin trading happens through bitFlyer today. And we also think that we're the most regulated exchange. So we have one of the first licenses in Japan. We have 43 licenses in the USA, including New York BitLicense, which is very difficult to get. And then we're licensed in by the European Union. And another key area for us that I'm quite passionate about is customer support. So the U.S. market has grown a lot in 2017, and a lot of people had bad experiences other places. And one of the things that we're really investing in is just a fantastic customer experience in the US.
Sure. And what's that going to look like, though?
So I think people's frustration tends to be when they don't get responses for a long time, when there are like unaddressed issues, when they're stuck in an onboarding process. All of those problems are things that I'm really aware of here in the US, and we're working really hard to keep those times really reasonable.
Generally, my feel on that is the thing that takes the time is the ID verification stuff. If there's a massive backlog of that, because it's reasonably time consuming, is that just simply a case of manpower?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of ways you can attack it, right? There's technologies you can use. There's also a human component.
Sure. And I'm thinking back to a few news stories that I've covered about bitFlyer over the last maybe year or so. Do you have any plans to get a point of sale component? Because I seem to remember some news stories, and this is going back months and months, but it was something like bitFlyer helps, I don't know, like car garage accept Bitcoin as payment or something. So is there a point of sale piece in there in bitFlyer?
Yeah, so bitFlyer in Japan has a product called Pay that you can use to receive or send payments to people through our network. Right. And some retailers like Big Camera have adopted that, and you can buy things through Big Camera with Bitcoin. Gotcha. Although currently that's in Japan. And
then in that way, you kind of act like BitPay in the sense that if I'm a Japanese retailer and I want to receive the Japanese yen, but have the customer pay in Bitcoin, you can facilitate that exchange in the middle, right? Kind of like is that how it works?
Yeah, similar.
It kind of works like, what did I just say? BitPay, for example, yeah. All right. So someone asks, what is your business plan for your office in Luxembourg? Do you have an office in Luxembourg?
We do, yeah.
That's
the European office that I mentioned that we launched in January. Sorry, what was the question? What does the business plan look like?
What is your business plan for your office in Luxembourg? So go for it.
I think it's a pretty similar mission to the US, which has become a dominant exchange in Europe.
And using the same principles, yeah? Is that the global order book, is that really your crown jewel, would you say?
I think that's one of our crown jewels. The other thing that I'd argue is that when you start making it really easy to buy virtual currencies in a non-professional platform that the average consumer can touch, which is what Japan also has, I think that's going to be really powerful.
Sure. You know, someone goes who's just a regular consumer and they just want to, buy some crypto for the first time, but don't want to like trade it. I've always wondered if that order goes through to the market, or if that's a pot of Bitcoin that the exchange owns and is selling to the consumer. Are you following what I'm saying here? So say I go on to the exchange and then do a buy with my credit card, right? They quotes me, this is the rate you're going to get for your US dollars or whatever. Is it pulling that from the order book on the exchange, or is that a separate system? I've always wondered that.
Yeah. So like, where do you actually source that from?
Yeah.
It's that's frankly kind of up to the exchange, and there's a lot of ways to sort of make it possible. But certainly, exchanges is one place where you can source the inventory for that kind of a sale. Okay. But you can also have that inventory sort of in stock, for example, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that you always have that. That you're always just fetching it directly from an exchange.
Exactly.
So it ends up being sort of an inventory management and sort of a sourcing question.
Sure. Someone asks, what are the fees for buying and selling crypto on bitFlyer?
Yeah, so we currently don't charge a fee, which is great. So if you sign up for bitFlyer USA or bitFlyer Europe, the trades are fee-free for a limited time.
Is that a little bait to attract customers in the first instance, right?
That might have been a plug. I'm not sure.
Sure. But you are going to introduce fees later down the line, right? I suppose.
We are, yeah.
You charge withdrawal fees as well, I assume?
There's a $10 withdrawal fee for wires, mostly because that's what we get charged. So we have to pass that cost on.
What about if I withdraw some crypto?
The only fee that you would pay is the transaction fee, like the Bitcoin.
Oh, really? You don't charge a official withdrawal fee if I withdraw the Bitcoin? Because that's something that a lot of mainstream exchanges do.
I mean, the fee that you pay is like the miner fee, effectively, or the estimated miner fee.
Okay, well that's different. Because a lot of the other exchanges that I use, you pay that and like a withdrawal fee, which is
no. I mean, it's your money. You should have the ability to use it.
Sure. Okay, I don't understand what that question is, so I'll skip that one. Someone asks, what's the next big thing after Bitcoins? Proof of work or proof of stake? I don't know if that's a question for you as a sort of a running an exchange. Someone says, what do you think about the notion of traditional securities becoming tokenized? Are you seeking to list or support any of these types of things?
Traditional securities being tokenized. The tough part there is well, one, there'd just be a lot of regulatory work, and securities in some ways are already tokenized, right? Like they're traded assets that you can move back and forth. They're just not crypto assets.
Sure.
So, I think what you typically hear about more is like things that aren't securities getting tokenized. And then there's the question of do those become securities or utility tokens, or on what exchange can they sort of operate in the U.S. But I suppose that if you wanted to tokenize existing sort of like equities markets, it would just be a lot of regulatory work. I'm not sure what the benefit would be.
So you made a point there, like they're kind of tokenized in the sense that there's an abstraction, like a piece of paper that represents it. I think people are talking more about, blockchain-based token coins that can float around that represent, a traditional security or something like that. So I suppose the main benefit of tokenizing it in a cryptocurrency is just the friction and the ease of movement and the security and all that kind of stuff, I suppose. Yeah,
that's true. It could be easier to move, and I think within equities, the one interesting difference between crypto markets and sort of equities markets is that in equity markets, you always have to sell for, like in the US, for example, US dollars. If I had a share of Apple, I wanted to buy a share of Tesla, I'd have to sell my Apple share, get US dollars, use that US dollars to then buy a Tesla stock, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's in the crypto space, you can actually do currency pairs. Like theoretically, there would be a Tesla, denominated by Apple currency pair that you could trade in and out of.
You could. Yeah, if someone was creating a market and you could do a buy and sell across that, you could. How many Apple shares for a Tesla share, sort of thing.
Yeah. So in Japan, we have an Ethereum BTC board, so you can trade back and forth Ethereum relative to Bitcoin.
You use the word board. What do you mean by that? Because I wouldn't.
Yeah, so it's I guess it's the term for describing sort of the activity, right, and the trading activity within that currency pair. So on that board, you have, let's say, Bitcoin and US dollars, and the only thing you can do is trade Bitcoin and US dollars amongst each other. And there's all these tools that we provide that can you can create sort of complicated strategies, but at the end of the day, you're just operating within those two currencies. It's just an order book, right, for a certain currency pair.
Okay.
And we call that a board.
Okay, I think I would call that. I'd use the word market, but you say board specifically to mean that thing.
But that board only contains one product. If you think about it like that, right? Mm-hmm. It's like Bitcoin that you can buy with US dollars, or you can sell Bitcoin for US dollars, but a board doesn't contain like multiple currencies.
I got you. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. Someone asks, do you provide people with a 1099 form? I have no idea what that is. I'm assuming that's some kind of IRS tax form or something like that. You know what a 1099 is?
Yeah. So I think he's referring to a tax question. We don't provide a 1099 form, but what we provide is a transaction history that you can download and do your taxes based off of all the transactions that have that you've taken place in your tax year.
Okay, I think I see what they mean when they've done their trading and need to report that, because in America it's rather complicated to do. It is now anyway.
Yep.
So someone asks, what kind of policies do you have in place to protect customers, like privacy, security, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So we take security very seriously, as any virtual currency exchange should. One thing that we offer is two-factor authentication, and that's something that we highly encourage our members to use. We have a cold wallet where the majority of sort of global assets are stored. We force sort of like re-login upon certain suspicious activities. Like so, and there's a lot more sort of we do from a security perspective that I can't really share, just given the nature of sort of the detection. But I think the key point is that security is obviously something in our space that is incredibly important because of what's happened in the past with other exchanges. And also, I think it's worth noting that we are insured in Japan, so customer assets are protected.
Mm-hmm. Sweet. I'm just looking at the bitFlyer site here. It actually says, "Are you a resident of Europe? Please see our website for European-based customers." So that's what you were talking about earlier on with regards to flipping the different interfaces. What's clever is the section that says like what media outlets you've been featured in. It changes to I don't know if that's intentional, but it changes to be more appropriate to the audience. That's kind of clever. That's kind of clever. I like that. Sweet. So let's bring myself back here. So I've flicked through all the questions in the chat and that were submitted beforehand. Oh, here's another one. Is it possible to pull all the crypto bought on an exchange? So I think what they mean is if someone wanted to withdraw all the crypto that they had stored on bitFlyer, can they do it? I think where this is coming from is there's been a lot of fear spread around recently about, well, the exchanges are basically doing fractional reserve banking. That's what people are starting to suspect, that, you know, if X exchange says they have this much crypto, they only really have 70% of that, and if there was a bank run effectively, they wouldn't have all the crypto there. So the question is,
I'll answer that. So we're not a fractional reserve service. Right. So no, you can withdraw all of your coins at any time. We can't use your customer funds, and you know, like I said before, we're highly regulated. There's no concerns. You can withdraw it.
So it's a full reserve, right? That's basically what they want to know. So that's good. You also said that it's insured in Japan. Is that like the deposit insurance thing in case of, you know, insolvency, the consumer's funds are protected type of thing?
No, it's actually related to cyber theft. So if in the event that bitFlyer experiences some kind of like a security event and your funds are lost, there's a certain amount of coverage that consumers have.
Okay. I'm impressed that an insurance company would take that on, given that, you know, cryptocurrency is so new and it's a big target for the attackers, right? But sweet. So that's reassurance that I'm sure that doesn't lead you to be slack in any way in terms of security. That's just an extra thing, you know. If some black swan event happened, even then the consumer's funds are still insured against that cyber theft angle. Yeah,
and obviously that's the last thing we ever want, but it gives some peace of mind.
Right, but that's no excuse for not having the insurance, just in case. Right. You know? Absolutely. Cool. So that's pretty much all the questions I've got. Is there anything else you wanted to make sure that we covered? Something you want to make sure that the audience knows about bitFlyer before we close up?
Yeah, I think what I'm just want to share is one, please try us out. We're new in the U.S. and we're really focusing on trying to provide the best experience that is available in the space. And then, stay tuned for, news coming from us more on the consumer front.
Cool. So if people want to stay tuned, where's the best way to follow you guys, get in touch with you? Have you got an email list, that kind of stuff?
Honestly, just sign up for the page and we're going to keep you very much informed of all of our new products. So just go to bitflyer.com/ENUS.
Okay. It also says here you can sign up for a corporate account as well if you want one.
That's right. Yeah. So we support both corporate and individual traders.
Excellent. Well, that's cool then. Oh, there's one more question here. How do you prioritize your orders? Is it instant? I don't really know what that means. I suppose that's a first in, first out type of system.
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure what the question is.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. That's fine. Okay. So for now, Barteks, thanks very much for being on the Cryptoverse.
Thanks so much. Appreciate the time and great talking to you.
All right, guys, if you like this episode, hit the like button. If you disliked it, hit the dislike button. Leave us a comment below with some feedback and get subscribed. So until next time, it's me and Barteks saying bye for now.
Bye.